few years ago, I was living alone in a quiet suburban house at the end of a cul-de-sac, where nothing unusual ever happened, and the only exterior light I regularly used was a small motion-activated lamp mounted above the side door that led from the driveway into the kitchen. And because I worked late shifts, I often returned home well after midnight, which meant I became familiar with the normal rhythm of that light turning on as I approached and shutting off again once everything was still. One night after arriving home and locking the door behind me, I noticed the side light turn on again roughly 10 minutes later, even though I had not moved anywhere near that part of the house. And at first, I assumed it had been triggered by an animal or passing car headlights. But what caught my attention was that the light did not turn off after its usual interval, and instead remained steadily illuminated. From the hallway, I could see a faint shadow shifting across the frosted glass panel beside the side door. Not a clear silhouette, but a change in brightness that suggested something was standing close to the exterior wall. And although I considered approaching to confirm it, I found myself standing completely still, listening for any additional sound. After several minutes, the light turned off and everything returned to darkness. And because nothing else happened, I eventually went to bed assuming I had misinterpreted ordinary movement. But the following night, the same sequence occurred at almost the exact same time. And this time, I noticed a very soft tapping sound that came in slow, evenly spaced intervals, as though something hard was making brief contact with the exterior surface of the door. I turned off every light inside the house and stood in the kitchen watching the glass panel without moving, and after nearly a full minute of silence, the side light activated again and remained on, yet there was no visible movement and no shadow crossing the glass. The third night, I deliberately left the interior kitchen light on before stepping outside through the front door and walking around the house toward the driveway where I could see the side entrance clearly. And what I observed was not a person standing near the door, but a narrow cleared area in the condensation on the glass at approximately eye level, as though something had been positioned there long enough to warm the surface. I returned inside immediately and locked every door, and from that night forward, the motion light began activating irregularly at times when I was completely still inside the house, and sometimes it would remain on for several minutes without interruption. Eventually, I installed a camera facing the side entrance, but the recordings showed only empty space illuminated by the light with no visible source of motion. And yet on multiple nights, the footage captured the faint tapping sound occurring while nothing appeared within the frame. I no longer use the side entrance, and I keep that portion of the house dark after sunset. But occasionally, while sitting in the living room, I notice a soft glow spreading across the kitchen wall, followed by the quiet activation of the light outside, as though something has once again taken its place beside the door and remained there long enough to be recognized. After moving into an older two-story home, I quickly learned that the upstairs hallway produced ordinary settling noises at night, which I initially accepted as normal structural behavior. But over time, I began noticing that a specific section of the hallway floor would produce a single, isolated creaking sound that occurred only after I had turned off every light and remained in bed for several minutes. Because the hallway connected 3 empty bedrooms and a bathroom, I assumed temperature changes were causing minor expansion in the floorboards. Yet the sound was unusually consistent in both location and timing, and never occurred while I was walking nearby. One evening, I left my bedroom door slightly open and turned off the hallway light before going to sleep, and after several minutes of silence, I heard the familiar creak, followed by a second sound that resembled a subtle shift in weight, as though pressure had been applied and then slowly released. From my position in bed, I could see a narrow strip of hallway through the doorway, and although the space appeared empty, I noticed that the darkness within that section seemed to change density very gradually, as though something had passed between the door and the opposite wall without producing a defined shape. The following night, I placed a small object on the hallway floor directly in the location where the sound usually occurred and left my bedroom door open again. And when morning arrived, the object had not moved, yet it was positioned at a slightly different angle than I had left it, while no other disturbance was visible. Over the next several nights, I repeated the observation and discovered that the creaking sound only occurred when the hallway was completely dark and the bedroom doors remained closed. But if any light source was present, the sound did not occur at all. Eventually, I installed a small night camera facing down the hallway and reviewed the footage after the sound was recorded. And although no visible figure appeared in the recording, I noticed that at the moment the creak occurred, a narrow section of the image briefly lost sharpness, as though something had passed between the camera and the far wall without reflecting enough light to be seen. I now keep the hallway light on throughout the night and sleep with my door fully closed, yet on rare occasions I still wake to a single, isolated creak, followed by silence, and the faint impression that the hallway beyond the door has briefly become occupied before returning to emptiness. The house I currently live in has a large window facing the backyard that remains uncovered at night because the property behind the house is empty and extends into a narrow tree line where no neighboring homes are visible. And for the first several months, I never considered the window unusual. Until one evening, while turning off the living room lights, I noticed a faint reflection in the glass that did not correspond to anything inside the room. At first, I assumed it was a distortion created by the interior lighting. But when I turned the lights back on, the reflection disappeared entirely and only returned when the room was dark, appearing as a vertical interruption in the uniform darkness beyond the glass. Over the following nights, I began noticing the same irregularity at different times, but always when I was positioned within view of the window. And although I never observed movement directly, I experienced the consistent sensation that the exterior space beyond the glass was not empty when observed from inside. One night, I stepped outside through the back door and walked several yards away from the house before turning back toward the window. And from that position, I could see the interior clearly, but noticed no reflection or disturbance in the glass. Yet when I returned inside and turned off the lights, the irregular vertical interruption appeared again in the exact same location. To test whether anything physical occupied the space outside, I placed a small object on the ground directly beneath the window and observed it from inside over several nights. And although the object never moved, I eventually realized that the reflection in the glass always remained positioned slightly above where the object rested, regardless of my viewing angle. The final incident occurred when I deliberately left the interior lights off and stood motionless several feet away from the window while watching the dark surface of the glass. And after nearly a full minute of stillness, the reflection slowly shifted to the side and disappeared entirely, even though nothing outside had changed. I keep the curtains closed now after sunset and avoid looking directly at the window when the interior lights are off. But occasionally, while moving through the room, I notice a faint change in brightness on the glass that stops immediately when I face it, as though something beyond the window is aware of being observed and chooses not to remain visible when attention is directed toward it.